Welcome back. Today we're going to finish the crazy sunset quilt that we started last week. Thanks for joining me. If you haven't seen part 1, make sure to check that out first. You can find the link for that below. As I work my way downward from the sky into the landscape, I'm going to start with some lighter blue colors and use some simple stripes and build a gradient that will help us transition from the darker sky into the foreground and mountains. If you look carefully, you might spot some helpers in the background. These strips were all cut to a uniform width to keep a nice clean look, and I'm piecing 2 sets of each so that way I have enough to extend across the entire quilt. Next, I'm just going to trim the ends and then align the ends with some pins to keep the stripes lined up with each other, and then sew them together to get one long set of stripes. After that, I'll attach it to the top that I built in part 1. Here you can see the sky with the gradient section attached, extending downward towards the part that we'll work on next. So I want to start the top of this next section with some lighter orange colors, some peachy colors, things that look like what you'd see in the sky right at sunset, just when the sun is dipping below and everything kind of gets lit up. I've got some strips like this already in the stash, so I'm not going to bother cutting these down. I'm going to use them the size that they are. I'm going to put them together in a similar way to how I did the gradient that I added at the beginning of this video, but I'm also going to cut them and repiece them to introduce some, unusual angles so that it doesn't look too boring. So I'm cutting these at arbitrary angles, and then I'll repiece them back together, and then eventually I'll straighten out the edges so that we can attach it to the rest of the quilt. But that's going to kind of give me a zigzag effect throughout this section. You will lose some fabric as you straighten things out, so if you do this, make sure to build your strip set a little wider than you need. At one end, I'm adding a batik print that I like, not more stripes, and then at the other end, I'm adding some stripes kind of going a different direction, really just trying to make things a little bit more visually interesting. Now I'm going to create some straight edges that allow me to attach it to the rest of the quilt, and this is where you can see how I'm losing some fabric, but I'm gaining a nice zigzag effect throughout this section. I'm going to attach this part to the rest of the quilt top, and then we'll have a look. Okay, here's how this section looks finished and attached to the quilt top. I think it looks pretty good. I'm happy with it. I think I lost a little bit of those stripes going the other direction over on the left-hand side, but that's all right. I really like how these colors are echoing the similar colors that are in the sun on the upper left. Next, I need to start building the landscape. We're going to have some rolling hills in this section, so I'm going to get out some greens and browns and yellows and other colors I think will work for that. I've got this red print that has some houses on it, and I think that's kind of cool because it gives it sort of a look like it's a little town on the hillside, so I'm definitely working that print in. You'll notice I'm using a lot of strips that came from jelly rolls, and that's just because it's what I happen to have on hand. So I could cut those down further and try to make things a little more intricate. But in this case, I chose to kind of go with a striping effect to give me that profile of rolling hills. So I've got my town in the foreground here already set, and I'm experimenting with a few ways to build out from there and develop some of the rolling hills that I want to kind of look like they're in the background of the town. I had originally made this zigzag piece thinking I might have it run across the top, but then I didn't want to deal with the hassle of trying to attach it with the curve. So what I'm going to wind up doing here is cutting it in half and then using that same stripe piece and just attaching it down on the other end. I've got a few different orientation options to choose from here, so I'm just taking a look and seeing which way I want to go. You've probably noticed by now, but each time I attach a new section, what I'll do is use a ruler to cut a straight edge that is continuous with the previous section. That gives me a straight edge to attach the next portion to. This technique lets me take unusual shapes, positioned at unusual angles, and attach them together while still having an easy time sewing everything. As I continue to build the landscape outward, in the background here behind the town, I've put a print in that looks like a field of flowers. And the scrap that I had for this print just happens to be a lot larger than I need. So I'm trimming here a straight edge. And this trimming edge is actually going to become the interface between this and the part of the quilt that we were working on previously. I'm now going to use the part I trimmed off to become the right edge of this same section. I'm still going to have one corner section that I need to fill in the upper right here. The last part of this section that I need to fill in is this lower left corner. What I have now ends at an angle, so that won't work. I need to extend a little further. So I've picked this dark green print that kind of gives a forest look. Okay, here's the finished version of this section. I think it came out pretty good. You'll notice that it's not exactly straight. It's a little taller on the left-hand side. So what I'm going to do is trim it so that it's straight, and then that way we can attach it to the rest of the quilt. In this case, I want to maintain the brown stripe that we have on the bottom, so I'm going to do most of my trimming from the top edge. Now I want the top edge and the bottom edge to be parallel so the quilt stays square when we put it together. So what I've done is fold it in half just to keep things easier for cutting. And then I've taken the bottom edge and I've aligned that to the markings on the cutting mat. Now all I have to do is use the ruler at the other end, also aligned to the markings on the cutting mat, make my cut, and then the two edges will be parallel. Okay, now I have the top and bottom edge parallel, so it's ready to attach to the rest of the quilt. The left and right edges are not parallel to each other yet. I'll wait to square those up until I attach this to the rest of the quilt, and then I can square everything together. Here we get our first look at everything together, and I think it's looking good. I still need to square up the left and right edges of the bottom section, so I'm just going to open this up on the cutting mat and use the markings on the cutting mat to get a straight edge that aligns with the upper section of the quilt. I'm not worried about being super precise here because I can square this all up again after I quilt it. So I just want to get it close, and that'll be good enough until the quilting is done. And with that, we are done. Thanks again for joining me. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you feel inspired to do some quilting of your own. I look forward to seeing you on the next one.